Live from America's finest city. This is Real Talk San Diego on ESPN 1700.
Hey, what's happening, gang? You are live in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, co-founder of the Greenhouse Group, holding it down for Real Talk Radio San Diego every Tuesday from 10 to noon. And we got some of the coolest local people talking about some of the coolest local stuff. Promising not to let you down today, because leaving us better than how they found us in the house is Tess Reutzel. Reutzel, right?
Reutzel.
Oh, Reutzel. Okay, Reutzel, Reutzel, tomato. Law offices of Tess Reutzel, LC. And the reason why we've got Tess in the house today is because, tell me if this isn't what your heuristic on relationships is right now. Isn't it kind of the whole thought that everybody says, okay, what about 50% of all marriages end up kind of failing, right? I mean, come on, Tess.
I mean, that's what people say.
That's what people say.
I don't know that that's accurate.
Well, so
Actually,
here's...
I know that it's not.
Now, don't steal my thunder now, because this is my whole premise for the show, is that it's actually a lot lower, at least in California anyway. It's actually a lot lower than that, right? And Tess, you did the math for me on this leading up. You researched, and it's what?
10% actually in California.
It's actually more like 10%.
Right.
Right? That is astonishing. So that either means that someone's smoking crack on the 50, or in California, it's that much lower?
I guess so. According to my research this morning, that's what the current statistics are in California. I think Nevada has the highest rate. Don't ask me about the statistic with that.
Insert your own thought monger around that right there immediately. So here's, and I got a couple friends right now that are actually going through this, and this is the reason why I sought Tess out, was not for her to purport statistics for us and then, try to come up with another 55 minutes of placing meaning on that. It's because it seems like there are some, you might just call them rules to the game, okay? Regardless if it's 50% or if it's 10%. Bottom line, gang, people split up. Okay, it's sort of the nasty, dark side of relationships. You might then go as far as to say, everything that begins beautiful also has a beginning, middle, and of course it has that end. And in this modern facet of life, a lot of times you end up accumulating some stuff, So we thought it would be appropriate to come up with a show where we said, look, here's the 4 things you got to know if you're breaking up. Or breaking up, maybe say divorce, right? Because
right.
Tess, that's your bag, right?
That's my bag.
And by the way, while we got you here live, Tess, why don't you go ahead and introduce to your fans exactly who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Tess Reutzel. I am the owner of Law Offices of Tess Reutzel. We are a family law firm in downtown San Diego, the Symphony Towers building. By family law, what we do is divorces, prenuptial agreements, custody visitation issues. We deal with financial support, child support, spousal support. We do marital planning, such as prenuptial agreements, post-marital agreements. And then we also deal with post-judgment. So after somebody's divorced, they can go back and revisit custody visitation issues and support issues. So that's what we do. A little bit about me. I grew up in rural Iowa. I went to the University of Iowa for undergrad.
What's the divorce rate out there, Tess?
I couldn't tell you that. And
by the way, what do they call? Are you an Iowani?
An Iowan.
An Iowan, of course.
So I came to San Diego for law school. I went to California Western School of Law downtown.
A lot of friends that went there.
Yeah. And knew right going into law school that I wanted to do family law. I was a psychology undergrad, and I figured that, and I figured out that I loved the law, and that seemed like a great combination of the two. A lot of what I do is really helping people through a difficult situation.
God, ain't that the truth? It's like I feel that, and check my thinking on this, see if this resonates with you at all in your practice, but it's like we came out of the information revolution. Right. Now, there's no shortage of information out there. You can click on Google and you can become just dangerous enough at just about anything, right? But what is still missing from that, though, is the human element of sprinkling some consciousness on it. And everybody ends up coming up to a point, not everybody, but let's just say most for effects and purpose of this conversation, where you're going to hit some change. Right. Change is going to smack you right in the forehead.
Right.
And you can either continue down the path of status quo, or you can lean into it and say, okay, this is my moment from whatever it is, right? And so in our businesses, we are very similar in this, right? Helping folks get into and out of homes, probably, as they say, one of the most 5 top stressful things you'll ever do in your life.
Right.
And for you, come on, the big D's, right? I mean, it's like divorce, death. I mean, I'm not saying you're dealing with all that stuff, but definitely divorce while going through that patch of life. That's got to be one of the most stressful things to deal with, right?
Right. And my job, my personal goal is to make it as little stress as possible. It's never a fun situation to deal with, but I want to help people get through it with as little pain as possible.
Yeah, makes sense, right? You might say it's where the help is needed the most. And so Thank you for that little run. I appreciate it. So let's get into this. Now, in no particular order, Tess, I was just thinking out loud, and I'm glad that you kind of helped me put some structure around this with your experience. But, you know, I'm just seeing people too far downstream in what I do, making mistakes in the whole split up process. And it feels like by the time it gets to me, it seems like it's too hard to kind of undo those things. And so I wanted to get an expert panelist here in the studio with your background to kind of hash through some of this stuff. So the first thing is the thing no one wants to talk about. So can we get into prenup?
Right. I would say that that's your biggest or one of your biggest mistakes going into a divorce is not planning prior to the marriage when you still like the person on the other side. That's the best time to address these difficult issues. So
it's so funny though, because can you not find yourself in the humor of the fact that here you are, romance tells you that you're on this path, you're celestial beings that bumped into each other on this orbit of foreverness, and then all of a sudden, dun, 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 you're like, have to talk about things like splitting up?
Right.
Like, how much of a buzzkill is that?
Right. Well, I think it's... I think these are conversations that every couple should have anyway when they're going into a marriage. So
But that's a good point, though. Should every couple, or should couples that just have like Kanye West, Kim Kardashian bank accounts have them?
Right. Well, I think every couple should have the conversation. Whether or not they need a premarital agreement is maybe a different story.
Good point. Hold on. Ready? There you go. Right there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really depends on the situation whether a premarital agreement is right for you. A lot of people now are getting married at an older age, so they have.
Is that true?
Well, I think the statistics would say that. I can't quote that statistic either right now, but generally speaking, I think that that's what they are saying. So obviously, if you're getting married at an older age, you have more of an opportunity to come into the marriage with assets. So,
and I'll tell you something, it makes sense. I've never heard that stat, but it immediately resonates with me because you think of things like online dating. You think of things like eHarmony. Like normally when people get older, their circles get smaller.
Right.
And so you end up being the divorcee or the widowee of a little community, and like that's it. That's your identity.
Right.
So it's like now the internet allows us to be much more expansive. So that totally makes sense. But I love what you said about figuring it out when you still love each other.
Right.
So what's your like if that's a mistake, the whole concept of prenup, like what's the anvil on the toe that we all need to leave with here in the consciousness of a new perspective around this?
Well, I think that it's important, again, to have these conversations and talk before the fact about what may happen or what potential issues may come up during your marriage if, God forbid, your marriage ends. So there's several things that we can address in premarital agreements. If you have separate property coming into the marriage, we can talk about what's going to happen if the value of that property increases during the marriage.
Like business owners too, right?
Correct. And businesses are another. If you own a business, premarital agreement's a really good idea because businesses can become an accounting nightmare if you're going through a divorce, and you don't want your business to be impacted by your personal life. So
it sounds like you're speaking from experience, and that's why we got Tess Reutzel in the house, owner of Law Offices of Tess Reutzel. By the way, you can catch her at Law Offices of Tess Reutzel. That's REUTZEL. Prenup.com, right?
Right.
Thank
you.
I got it locked down now. So coming up, Tess, back in the hot seat, though, in about 3 minutes, we're going to hop right back into the prisoner of not being informed. And this is a big one. It's a gray area, but we're going to flesh it out with Tess Reutzel in the house. That's why you're in the stash, baby. Coolest local people talking about some of the coolest local things. That's Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5-Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5-Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5-Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
What's happening, gang? You are back live in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, owner of the Greenhouse Group, helping folks get into and out of homes. And by the way, if you're in that spot right now, go check out our site right now. It's thegreenhousegroupinc.com. We got a brand new listing right in the heart of San Diego. It's incredible. It's only $400,000. You can't get a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath with the ridiculous pool and all that cool stuff under $400 in San Diego anymore. So anything real estate related, we got your back. And who's got our back in the stash today is Tess Reutzel. And she's dropping some knowledge right now on the whole concept of, I know, something that's probably not the funnest thing to talk about, but man, you got to talk about it at least some point in time. Otherwise, it's kind of one of those things, Tess, you wouldn't agree, where it's like you either deal with it or it's going to deal with you.
Oh, I think that's completely accurate.
You know, so whether the divorce rate's 50% or 10% or whatever the case may be, bottom line is people get into relationships and people get out of them. And that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, you bump into some folks and if that thing has completed itself, then the wisdom is to say, you know what? We're complete. We had a great run. You know, and we love each other, and it's time to be complete with it. But sometimes there's some lingering stuff that makes it not that fun, like assets.
Right.
Like stuff what gets you involved, Tess. And, of course, that's why we got you in the house. You're the owner of Law Offices of Tess Reutzel. You can catch her at Law Offices of Tess. That's TESS, 2 S's, Reutzel, REUTZEL.com. You've been in business since 2012 right here in San Diego.
Right.
Yeah. Making it happen. So, listen, Tess, right back on the hot seat. I got this list of stuff, and I'm glad you're helping us vet through this stuff. I'm seeing a lot of folks with problems a little bit too far down the line. One of the things that I love that you put a frame around is that concept of not being informed. So can we call this our second mistake
Yes.
people make when breaking up? Okay, so lay it on us. What's some of the chief things that you see about not being well informed in this process?
Right. So when you're going through a divorce, not everybody has gone to law school and is familiar with how community property works and how custody and visitation work in California. So.
I'm so glad you're bringing up community property. Can you please talk about this?
Sure.
It seems like everybody has this myth. Go ahead.
So, community property.
Yes.
So, community property is everything that you own from your date of marriage to the date that you separate. And in California, community property state, anything that you acquire together during that time is split equally in the event of a divorce.
Right. And so are there any little like tricks to that game or, you know, like things that are kind of snakes in the grass and elements? Like a lot of people I know, for example, they're just together. Maybe they're not married and they kind of think that this whole thing commutes. When does it or when doesn't it?
So what you're referring to is common law marriage. So back in the day, if you were together for a certain number of years, then you were considered legally married under the law. But not many people realize that there's no such thing as common law marriage in California anymore.
Bingo. Can I get you one of these for that?
Sure.
It seems like everybody just thinks if they hold out long enough with this person that they're going to get half of all of his stuff.
No, that's not
true.
how it works.
Right. So, but back for community property, though, this is definitely in effect. And I love this thought, too, because, you know, it's like there's the old saying, behind every great man is a great woman, behind every great woman, a great man. It's like you do it together.
Right.
You know, because if one person's a homemaker and the other person's making the money, it doesn't mean if you guys split up that that the person who made the money gets to take all the money because you guys did that together.
Right.
You couldn't have done it without each other.
Right. You divide and conquer.
And I love that thought, right? So that's one of them. Now, what else is on that list of yours? These are, by the way, things about not being informed.
Right. So in family court, a lot of people are what we call in pro per, meaning they represent themselves in the court case.
And what's your thought about pro per?
Well, and I realize that everybody has their situation. Not everybody can afford an attorney. So some people have to be in pro per, and that's fine. But the beauty is most family law attorneys, including myself, offer a free phone consultation or a free consultation. And I think that it is beneficial for anybody going through this process to take advantage of a consultation with an attorney so they can get a general understanding of how things work. I see a lot of people that are representing themselves going to court with unreasonable expectations. So they want to argue over everything when really they have no argument.
And can I interject? This is actually a very shameful, embarrassing personal experience I have.
All right, let's hear it.
When I was in college, I had a house with a bunch of friends, and it was a classic slumlord situation. Now, you could totally make the argument in retrospect that we might have had something to do with that, but the truth is he was a terrible landlord, didn't do anything. The house was a mess.
Right.
Okay. So we thought we had all these great rights. And so because there was this whole thing that went down with him trying to do our rent, and then we didn't pay him for a couple months because we were in protest, had no idea what we were doing, right? So we go to court all emboldened because we think we're going to take this guy down. And his lawyer steps up and says 5 words in Latin we've never even heard before, and we were done.
Right.
So it's it's not about who's right, because we were definitely right. And even though I'm sure we had, in the large sum of things, this dude totally did us wrong. But it's not about that. It's about knowing the game and knowing how the game is played. And that's why, of course, you guys play such a huge role in this.
There's a procedure.
You can navigate that. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's definitely worth someone's time to talk with an attorney and just kind of figure out that procedure to make sure that that the divorce is handled as efficiently as possible.
Because again, it's not about being right.
Right.
If you're pro per, it's dangerous because you could be all right, but then you get up there and it's all bad.
And I see it happen all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. So what else? I love this. And the one thing I want to talk about is money. Okay, because, sometimes there's kids involved, right?
Oftentimes, yes.
Oftentimes there's kids involved, right? So let's talk about that. Child support and all that stuff. Isn't it just come down to a math issue at some point?
So in California, child support's actually a computer program. There's computer software. It's a formula, a guideline formula. So what we do is we plug in some numbers, and the judge has the same computer program. You plug in numbers, it spits out a number at you that is the child support amount, and it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So my office offers, during that free phone consultation, we plug in the numbers for people and tell them what they should expect for child support and spousal support. Mind you, there oftentimes is some wiggle room with the numbers that you actually use. But
case in point.
So, for example, if somebody owns a business, they may say on their tax returns that they are earning X amount, but thank you.
Yeah.
But when we actually
score, by the way, someone's going to win at the end of this. I don't know what.
So when you actually delve into their income, they're writing off personal expenses and things like that. So that's where it's helpful to really have somebody that does this day in and day out, and we can look at their QuickBooks and we can see what they're putting through the business, and then we can address that number that we put into the support calculation. The big factors that affect child support would be the percent of time each parent spends with the children, and each of their income levels. But there's other factors that do impact the numbers as well. What the guideline formula does is we include all this income information, and then it calculates the tax implications and comes up with a net spendable after taxes are paid and after support is paid, and then assigns a percentage of that the non-custodial parent has to pay to the other parent. But a lot of impropers don't realize that it's really just a math formula. So they go in thinking, I'm going to argue about how I can't pay my rent, and bring in this whole sad case about their current financial situation, when really the court, it's not relevant to the judge. So I think it's important for people to understand that it's really just a math problem.
Well, and one thing I'm hearing you say, and this again has a lot of corollary to what we do privately, is I sometimes find myself saying that the greatest gift I give my clients is the management what I think your two most precious commodities are, and that's your time and your energy.
Right.
And so you could imagine how that free phone call, like you said, to the pro-per, to help them take all of that time and energy allotted to creating the case about how they can't pay the rent, and you realize that you can appropriate that somewhere else, because this is just going to be a computer equation, and there might be a little bit of wiggle room on that, but not much. Right?
Exactly.
Is the same thing true for palimony alimony?
No, that is treated a little bit differently. There's a family code section that lists about 10 different factors that the court is supposed to consider. And that would be where I can't pay my rent would come up. The court's supposed to look at a supported party's need for support and the paying party's ability to pay, as well as several other factors, the duration of the marriage, the marital standard of living.
That makes sense.
So the court has much more flexibility when it comes to spousal support, child support, really no discretion.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess it makes sense, because the child thing needs to be, taken care of systemically. Whereas the relationship between the husband and wife and stuff can kind of be like a, maybe what they were used to in lifestyle and stuff. There's more of a gray area in that. But there has to be a mandatory minimum for the kid.
Exactly.
Right. That kind of makes sense.
Exactly. And with your expenses, of course, you can make decisions that are going to impact your expenses, and your children have to be supported. So they, they shouldn't be impacted by bad financial decisions.
Well said. Yeah, I think that was the other part of that point. And so what about, what else is there? So, what about property?
Right. So, again, with staying informed, the property division is very well defined in the law. Again, it's a math problem.
Okay.
So, like I mentioned, anything that's earned during the marriage, unless you have a prenuptial agreement that says otherwise, anything that's earned during the marriage is going to be split equally. So a lot of people don't understand that that's how it works. A lot of people
What do people understand? Yeah, because this is what I come up against, is there seems to be a lot of confusion around how the property is going to be handled.
Right, and I think it's a lot like you described prior. Many people come into a divorce believing that if I earned this money, or I was the one that was working and contributing to a retirement plan, that's my money. I was the one that was going to work every day, and people don't understand that everybody is contributing to, that person's ability to go to work every day. So a lot of people think that the earnings stay with the earning party.
Are there any sacred cows around that? Any points where that still is somehow true? Or is it literally just the proverbial line drawn kind of down the middle and it's halved up?
Really, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
There's exceptions when people, again, are coming into the marriage with businesses and things, and that can get a little bit, I guess the analysis isn't as easy, but generally speaking, you're considered a marital, you could think of it as your energy is going into a marital basket, and it doesn't matter who is contributing to that basket. It's all one basket. So any contributions to that during the marriage would be considered community property.
Yeah. Tess Reutzel.
Yes.
Because you're always right?
Yes. Exactly.
That's why you got into law.
Right.
Tess Reutzel, of course, she's the owner of law offices, TessReutzel.com. And so grateful to have you in the studio today so you could hash through some of this stuff. I'm so grateful for your contributions. So far we've covered the speaking of sacred cows, the sacred cow of the prenup, okay? And the big insight on the prenup is what?
It never hurts.
Exactly. Well,
it may hurt.
Romantics might think differently about that, but I got your point. And then, of course, the second element is just not being informed. And God, when is this ever not true, right? I mean, there's so many moving parts inside that space. So 2 big no-nos, we'll call them the mistakes, that you got to know not to make when splitting up or divorcing, down, and Tess 2 to go. So coming up, gang, we're going to get you caught up. I mean, this is ESPN after all. So, even though we're talking about some local people, talking about some cool local important stuff, we're going to get you all caught up on some sports stuff. And then back in the studio with Tess again about how treating these breakups like a divorce can prove very prudent. If you know what I'm talking about, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts here in a second. Real Talk Radio, San Diego. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5-Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5-Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most. At closing, why settle for less? 5-Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
My man Steve, always bringing it live with a little guitar riff for our 10:30 a.m. session. I appreciate you, brother. And I appreciate you for hanging out in the stash right now. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, owner of the Greenhouse Group, and I got you live here for the next half hour. SecretStashRadio.com on Real Talk Radio San Diego. And by the way, Tess, have you had this coffee yet?
Just this morning. It's delicious.
I always got to remember to drop some love to my man Justin Gittleman. He's the owner of Local Juice Company, and he's the one that fuels all these segments. Is this not the best cup of coffee you ever had in your life?
It is the best cup of coffee I've had in my life.
By the way, and that's coming right from her, she's about a quarter into the cold proof, which is actually Justin's play on Bulletproof. You ever heard of the Bulletproof guys? Dave Asprey, yeah. So basically, it's coffee on steroids. Not necessarily more caffeinated, but just healthy. Healthy as all get out. It's got ghee. It's got almond, stevia. Adrian, help me out here. Bird Rock coffee. What am I missing? And guarana, yeah. And it's brilliant. He's actually got a new shop up in Flower Hill Mall because he's always been in all the local. Oh, come on now. What do you call the things? The farmers markets, for goodness sakes, yes. Thank you, Justin. My man, I appreciate you. Cold pressed, Local Juice Co. for fueling our segment. And speaking of fuel, in the house today, we got some rocket fuel by the way of Tess Reutzel. Tess is the owner of Law Offices of Tess Reutzel, LC. You can catch her, by the way, at Law Offices of Tess, that's Tess, Reutzel, REUTZEL.com. And Tess, holding down divorce attorney, holding down family law practice.
Right.
I think there's a bunch of other stuff on that resume too, right?
Right. When you do premarital agreements, postmarital agreements, support modifications, custody visitation modifications, and a lot of divorce.
Yeah. So you can see why we got Tess in the house to talk about this, because I'm seeing too many folks right now too far down the line. Usually they're hitting me up, to try to get rid of the house, and there's all the stuff's already been spoken for because they didn't put the plans in place further upstream. So I got Tess in the house to vet through the 4 mistakes that you got to make sure you avoid when splitting up or getting a divorce, right? So number 1 was a prenup. The sacred cow of prenup, at least talking about it, right? At least getting it out in the open and making sure expectations, if nothing else, are established as early as possible. And then not being informed. And this is one of the things, you see pro-per people representing themselves all the time. Hey, at least take advantage of Tess's free phone call so she can tell you what to expect and tell you what to spend your time and your energy on. Now we get into the weeds a little bit, okay? Everybody, it seems, Tess, agree or disagree with me on this, when there's the breakup, it's usually not pretty.
Right.
It's usually kind of ugly. One person really made another person mad for some reason, or they made both people mad for so long, and they've had it. And so they treat it like a fight, right? And what's fight? The cousin to fight is litigation, right? We're going to court. You're going to get, raked across the coals. But, if clearer minds can prevail, there's a lot of advantageous support in this conversation that you like to coach on, right?
Right.
So take that thread from me. Let's run with this.
All right. Well, I guess my strategy, or when I'm talking with my clients, I always tell them that litigation should be your last resort. It really doesn't. Thank you. Really doesn't benefit anybody except for maybe attorneys. So really, all other avenues of resolving a divorce should be considered prior to going in front of a judge.
I love that's your perspective. Please continue.
Ultimately, if you go in front of a judge, probably neither party is going to be happy.
Right.
A person that's never met you or your children is going to decide the ultimate outcome of your life. So parties have much more flexibility and can be much more creative and figure out what works for their family in particular if we resolve things with the settlement. So as long as my client is up for it, I always approach the other side and say, hey, let's sit down and let's go through the issues and let's try to work things out. We don't have to go before a judge. As we talked about in the last segment, child support is a computer program. Yeah. We can sit down at my office and run the numbers and we can put it in an agreement and never have to see a judge. Custody visitation. In California, if you are asking for a judge to make a determination on custody visitation issues, you have to go to a mandatory mediation session first. They're going to be making collateral contacts, calling the kids' schools, talking with the kids oftentimes. If you have an idea of what's going to work as far as a parenting plan for your children without going through that process, there's no reason why we can't just sit down and put it on paper and be done with it. So I think a lot of people go immediately on the defensive if they're served with divorce paperwork, which I can see why that would happen, but it's really best most of the time to put those emotions aside and sit down and figure out how we can resolve this.
And I love the space that you're coming from with that too, because if there is a bias, let's just come out and say the big B word, about the divorce process when you get lawyers involved, it seems that it's always that way. They almost sometimes, at least in the eyes of the clients or perspective of the clients, create more mud than maybe the mud that had already been created with the two parties themselves getting into this conversation. And it gets drawn out, it gets more expensive, it gets more painful, and the two parties get further apart and the process goes. Now, I don't know if that's true or not because I don't do what you do, but I know that you've been practicing this whole concept since 2008. And with a CFLS, I know that's a very intense designation to get inside your game. You probably can understand that at a deeper level than just let's go start a fight.
Right.
Right. And I love that perspective. So any other wisdom you can share about why that's the business? Like that's the wisdom.
Well, and I think that this comes back again to unreasonable expectations, like we talked about in the last segment. If my client has unreasonable expectations, I view it as my job to tell my client privately, of course, that their fight isn't a fight worth fighting. So you're
racking up points left and right. This is going to be an all-time high. And if I speak with my clients about that, we can come to the table and we know what's worth fighting and what's not worth fighting for. Then it tends to be a much more efficient process. And ultimately, I mean, my clients always loved their adversary. So and oftentimes have children together. So I think that parties will leave the divorce situation in a much better position to be co-parents if they're able to create their settlement plan, because nobody wins in a divorce. It's so well said. And so, let's talk about that too. So you just mentioned a word that kind of makes most people's brains explode, co-parenting. It seems almost like oxymoronic, like isn't that kind of what parenting is? No, because when you're split up, it becomes the co-parent situation. So walk us through that right there, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. So I think that it's really important for parents to continue to communicate after they are no longer together, and going back to being able to have input in what the ultimate outcome is in the divorce. That I see that if people are able to sit down and create a parenting plan that works for them, they are better able to maintain a relationship that allows them to communicate with each other.
Would you kind of say that that's almost like your purpose in being in business, or like the meaning behind what you do?
Well, I think that, with family law, I went into this area of law because I love the personal connection that I get with my clients. Ultimately, I know more about my clients than probably their best friends know about them. And any of my clients who have children, I think that they view the parenting or the custody issue as the most important issue involved in their divorce. Finances aside, ultimately, their kids are what comes first. So I think that it gives me a lot of satisfaction to get them through that process in a manner that their kids are really going to benefit.
That's Tess Reutzel, gang. And if you can't tell just by hanging out with her for the last 45 minutes, Tess be knowing some stuff about breaking up. And I don't know how you got into that game in the first place, but you do it well. And so grateful that you not only have chosen this as your life's work, but the perspective that you've taken within it, I think, is your greatest asset. Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong. Lord knows that there's always a good reason for a good fight, okay? But when it comes to this game, trying to work out the resolution that doesn't involve litigation, come on, what would you just throw out some stupid stat and say it's probably better 9 times out of 10?
I would say definitely 9 times, probably 10 times,
10 times out of 10. At least, if nothing else, from the financial perspective anyway. And that's why treating it like a divorce is probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make when going into the situation. And so bless you if you're going through that space right now. And luckily, there's also some help. There's some good people out there. Not everybody just wants to have you break out your checkbook and drag this thing out into this big horrid affair that ruins you for the rest of your life emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially, because you got cats like Tess Reutzel out there. You can catch her, by the way, at law offices of TessReutzel.com. That's TessReutzel.com. And coming up, Tess, we're going to put a final punctuation on this 4-part series of the mistakes we're watching people make when going through a breakup, going through a divorce. And it has to do with something that you wouldn't think about, and it's record keeping.
Right.
And I'm going to leave that little hanging chad right there in the space and invite you to come right back. This is The Stash, baby. And we got some cool local people talking about some important local stuff. And we'll be right back on Real Talk Radio San Diego. Thanks for hanging out.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5-Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5-Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5-Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
All right, what's happening, gang? You are live back. This is The Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Abanias, Real Talk Radio San Diego, AM Radio 1700 on ESPN. Because why? ESPN? No. Midday. We got local cats talking about important things. And in the house today, I got Tess Reutzel. She is the owner of the law offices of TessReutzel.com. And we brought Tess in because she is a local expert on something no one likes talking about, and that's breaking up, right? And so we've been noticing that there are 4 major mistakes. You could say there's probably 24, Tess. Maybe atop the list is breaking up in the first place. Or maybe number 2, part and parcel, is getting together with the wrong person in the first place. Nothing we can do about that. But once you're downstream a little bit, there's some really important things you can do. So if you caught us late, number 1 is talking about the prenup. I know no one wants to talk about the prenup, but it's a critical part to make sure everybody can just know what to expect. So putting some structure, even if it's just a theoretical one for at the very least, so that, you're walking through that space with a little more intention than just the haphazardness that it seems like most people operate under. And then, the misinformed, right? And Tess, you got a great solution for that, because you mentioned that you've got your free consultation you do where folks can at least get some of the basic questions answered before they go into that space. Pro-pers out there, meaning representing yourself, you might want to take advantage of that. It's a great value-add little olive branch that Tess is dropping here for the stash. And then treating it like a divorce. Probably not the best way to go into this, thinking that you're going to expect a big fight and you're not going to get bloodied and you're not going to come out worse for the wear, right? So working through that space with the collaborative, looking through that lens abundantly versus the scared finite pie is going to, as Tess said, work out better 10 times out of 10. Not even 9. I even gave her an out. She said 10 times out of 10 it works better. So I love that thought. Now, the final one is something that you might not think about. At least I know it wasn't something that popped up in my radar when she first shared it with me, and that's record keeping.
Right.
Like record keeping during and then even record keeping after. Now, Tess, why is this such an important element?
Well, during the divorce, of course, if you aren't able to reach a settlement and you have to ultimately bring issues before the judge, you're going to have to show the judge paperwork. So just keeping track of things like the time that you actually are spending with the children. A lot of people have custody orders, but maybe one parent isn't following through with what's on paper. So keeping a good record of the parenting plan, keeping good records regarding communication regarding the children. If one parent's being nasty to the other parent all the time, it's good to have these type of things in written form, an email or text message, so that the
something
judge
corroborated,
can see.
not hearsay.
Yes.
Right.
So things like that. There's also during and after the divorce, if you have children together, there's still expenses that are being shared on top of child support.
And they might change.
Right. Things like out-of-pocket medical expenses and daycare costs, those are expenses that are paid on top of child support. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think child support is supposed to cover everything. Child support's supposed to be for those day-to-day living expenses. And then parents, normally, the court orders that they split equally any co-pays or any prescription costs and any daycare on top of that. So it's really important for people going through a divorce or after the divorce process to be keeping good records of those expenditures and providing them to the other parent on a regular basis so that number one, the other parent knows what's being owed. You can't go, you don't want to go years and years later and say, you owe me $1 million. That's just not going to work.
And take my word for it.
Right. So keeping track of those expenses and keeping the other side informed is really important.
So what I'm also hearing you say, which I think is a key element, something I wouldn't have thought of, is that you can retroactively visit these numbers. So let's say like you come to some agreement or there's some, mutual settlement that happens at this point in reference, and then things change down the line. There's a part in the process that allows you to come back to the table, so to speak, and like amalgamate the numbers that were originally agreed upon to reflect the new reality?
Well, so you can't retroactively rerun the numbers. You would have to go and file another motion with the court. So let's say our divorce is finalized and the judgment says father will pay mother $100 per month in support, and it's based upon certain factors. Like we talked about, there's a guideline formula. So one of the major factors is an income level. If one of the parties gets a raise or has less time with the children, those numbers are going to be impacted. And the court's always going to retain the ability to look out for what's best for the children and to rerun those numbers based upon the actual circumstances. So if things have changed financially, a parent can go and file a motion or go talk to an attorney and have an agreement written up that reruns the numbers based upon the current figures.
Can you think of like a recent example in maybe the not too distant past where this was something that came up for any one of your clients, and you watched how the court recognized that?
Well, it comes up all the time, and the court the court's bound by those guideline numbers. So anytime there's any change in circumstances financially, the court will just rerun the numbers. Again, there's no wiggle room there. It is how it is. Similar with custody visitation, the court always wants the ability to figure out a parenting plan that's in the best interest of the children, and things change. What's good for a 1-year-old baby at the time of divorce may not be good for a 15-year-old teenager. So oftentimes, especially when the children are young, when the divorce is finalized, eventually you have to go back and revisit and figure out what's best at that given moment. And the court's always going to have the ability to do that.
So, Tess, those are the 4 mistakes that we hashed out in preparation for the call, the show today. And I love your take on each one of them. But I'm curious, before we wrap up, is there any one thing that you would have loved to add to this list if there perhaps was time for a fifth?
Put me on the spot here. Well, I think maybe getting back to prior to all of this, I mean, I think that it's so important to, when you're making the ultimate decision of who you're going to marry, to really go over some of these financial situations. What would happen if we divorce? What would happen? Make sure that we're on the same wavelength with how we want to raise children. And having these conversations well before the marriage even happens, I think really is a takeaway, so that the ultimate goal is to avoid ever having to talk with me.
It's ironic, right?
Right.
And so it's funny, though, because at the top of the show, we talked about the stat of either it being 50%, which is sort of the heuristic, you might say, of what everybody seems to think the divorce rate is. In California, staggering that Tess's research said that it was only 10 actual percent. And by the way, any take on why you think that if that is truly the stat, why would you think it would be so drastically different from people's perceptions of what that number is?
I have no idea. I think that the divorce rate, I think that the divorce rate has gone down in recent years. So for whatever reason that is, I'm not sure. But regardless, it still happens, and it happens to the best of them. So being armed with the information to get through that transition as smoothly as possible, I think, is key.
It's so interesting to think about if people are really courageous enough to have that conversation in advance, Like, I'm just thinking back to my wife, and we're going through our courtship, and like how awkward that conversation would be if you're sitting there at dinner and you're like, hey, this is going really well. These dinners are great, and really progressing along. But have you thought about what's going to happen when we break up? Like, it just seems really like a curious concept. But man, it's like, with all of this stuff that we spent the last hour hashing through, is it almost sort of a non-negotiable that you at least have to have it at one point in time before you pull Humpty Dumpty all together in the first place?
Well, I think it's all about approach. If you come at
so
it,
my approach was lame, is what you're saying.
Right.
So I need some relationship coaching and advice. We got to get a new panel.
I mean, I don't know that's necessarily the way to approach it. I think the way to approach it is, how do you envision we're going to manage our finances during our marriage? How do you envision we are going to raise our children during the marriage? What are your views on this issue and this issue, and dealing with it like that?
That's the courageous conversation. Tess, thank you so much for putting a punctuation on that, making me look good, and also sprinkling some consciousness around this very uncomfortable topic, which is how in the world to navigate through a breakup. And Tess Reutzel, by the way, you crushed it today. I don't know how many points or dings you got, but it was off the chains, probably a record. You're going to want to go check her out. Well, I don't know if you ever really want to go check Tess out, but trust me, for at least that percentage, be it 10 or 50% that are going through that space, you need the best help possible to move through that change. And that's why Tess has got your back. You can catch her at law offices of TessReutzel.com. That's REUTZEL.com. Tess, thank you so much for being in the studio today.
Thanks for having me.
Secret stash. You left us better than how you found us. And coming up in the next hour, we're going to keep this conversation in the stash live with my man David. David is going to be talking about CPA stuff. Steven is going to be talking about CPA stuff. He's been holding it down over there in the heart of San Diego, which is right close to my office, and I can't wait to ask him 4 questions that are going to leave us all better than how we found each other. We'll be right back.